Like I always like to check with you. It shows that for some reason I don't know where it is, but it shows that I'm recording, right?
It's recording. It's recording.
Okay. Hi everyone, this is Cynthia. I'm the speaker coordinator for our chapter CMPS North San Joaquin Valley. And we're really happy you've come here. We have a really exciting talk, as always, but in particular, this is a little different because it's about, oh, I've got a deaf dog, she barks a lot. Hey. So this is our 20th event. All of them have been recorded, and they're all in the YouTube channel, and I'll tell you where that is later. So our speaker is Garry Hayes. He's a geology professor at Modesto Junior College, and the topic is the Great Valley We've Never Known. So that's going to be super interesting. So the agenda is I just do like a few minutes of introduction to the webinar series. Then Mike is going to talk about our chapter and CMPS in general and native plants in general. Then Garry, Professor Garry, will speak about the Central Valley we've never known. Like I just said, it will be, it's being recorded. So I'm not really going to go through these because there's so many of them, 19 before, but these are, we started in 2022. That's like 2 years ago. And anyway, these are all of them. But of course, if you go to our webinar channel, which is at nsjv_CMPS, you can find them all there. So you don't need to write this down. You can see there's been quite a huge mix of different topics: vernal pools and native gardens, landscaping, arranging native plants and bouquets, housecape, water. Water is always a great topic. The CNPS native plant gardening webinars. And then today, Great Valley We've Never Known. Then I'll just let you know we've got a couple already scheduled. August 12th is Restoring Dos Rios State Park, which is only 8 miles from Modesto. I've been there several times already. And you can actually sign up for this one already if you go to cmps.org/events. The October 14th Indigenous Peoples' Use of California Native Plants registration is also open. But there's 2 dates still in 2024 that aren't scheduled yet, September 9th and November 11th. And we have a webinar every month except December's. Here's our YouTube channel. We have 178 subscribers and about 6,000 views. Not this, it should say since, that's not what I meant. I meant as of. So as of today, we have 6,000 views. So these webinars are free. They're, of course, you know that they're open to all. You don't have to be a member of CMPS. You don't even have to be in California. You can be anywhere. If you want to reach me, here's my email address. It's cynthia.ca.nativeplants@gmail.com. If you have an idea for a webinar or you want to be a speaker, just let me know. I'm always looking for speakers. So that would be great. So, okay, well, I'm going to get back to this, do the intro of Garry after Mike does his piece. Mike, you want to take the screen?
Yeah. Let me do that. Okay. There it is. All right, everybody sees that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I wanted to give you an introduction to our chapter, the North San Joaquin Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society. The California Native Plant Society is a statewide organization, and you can join it for a regular membership of $50 to receive, give me a second. There we go. To receive Flora and Artemisia magazines, get benefits such as discounts at certain nurseries, sales and such, and the ability to join 2 different chapters of CNPS. If you'd like to join the North San Joaquin Valley chapter and 1 other, such as Santa Clara Valley chapter or Sacramento chapter or others, it would be an option when you go to the link on the slide. And we hope you join us here in the North San Joaquin Valley chapter and whichever other chapter you feel a kinship with. The regular membership link is right there, cnps.org/membership. This is the link to join up. And we have a quarterly newsletter sharing articles about CNPS and our local native plants and events and things like that. It just went out, actually. I should point out that we intend to do everything by email. We recognize that there are some people who actually prefer US mail, and for those who are inconvenienced, we do apologize, but we don't yet have the financial or volunteer base to put the newsletter out that way. CNPS has asked all chapters to find ways of reducing carbon, and saving all that paper is one of our contributions. If this is a true problem, let us know, but so far, no one has complained. So if you are on our list, you should have received our newsletter. We want our newsletter to get out to everyone. That's our mission, to promote native plants around our region, and our best way of doing that is to keep native plants on everyone's minds through events and presentations and gardening. So we want to keep those of you who haven't joined the statewide organization in the loop. Perhaps you can join us for an event or 2 and to remind you that we are here. And speaking of events, I wanted to tell you about this month's field trip. Join us for an exciting field trip to Ackerson Meadow in Yosemite. Ackerson Meadow is one of the largest mid-elevation meadows in the Sierra Nevada and the largest in Yosemite National Park. This ecologically and regionally significant wildlife corridor is a vital habitat for the state endangered great gray owl and the little willow flycatcher, along with many other at-risk species. We will be carpooling from Tractor Supply in Oakdale at 8 a.m. If you prefer, you can meet us directly at the meadow at 10:30 a.m. No park reservation is needed, as Ackerson Meadow is located just outside the park gates. To reach the meadow, turn left onto Evergreen Road just before the park gates and continue about 4 miles. Remember to wear shoes that can get wet, and bring water, a sack lunch, bug spray, and sunscreen. And we're planning a delightful end of summer potluck. This is a fantastic opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals who share a passion for native plants, gardening, and making a positive impact in our community. Whether you're a long-time member or new to this group, this event is a great way to get more involved in our chapter, forge new friendships, and discuss the plans for the future of our chapter and the Central Valley. We'll be sharing delicious food, so please bring a dish to share with everyone. Let's come together to celebrate the end of summer, share our gardening experiences, and brainstorm ideas on how we can make a difference in our community. You can RSVP. Please let us know if you can make it by emailing cnps.nsj@gmail.com. We look forward to seeing you there. And why care about native plants? We are finding out more and more each day about the true need to restore our environment as much as we can. The man who's been trying to explain the need for native plants with the most eloquence is Doug Ptolemy, a professor from Delaware. He's written several books on the subject, all of which circle around the theme that we have been damaging the environment dramatically, but there is hope in native plants. 95% of all birds feed insects to their young. Caterpillars are an important component of all that diet, and caterpillars cannot live on non-native plants with few exceptions. Native plants are critical to the ecosystem, and a backyard with no native plants, and that is a devastatingly high percentage of them, are ecological dead zones. Planting native plants in our yards helps moths, butterflies, native bees, and other pollinators, and therefore birds, and the web goes on and on. Our cities need not be devoid of butterflies, moths, and bees. For more information about this, you can watch a 1-hour video that knocked me over like a brick. This was a talk sponsored by our local Audubon chapter. This past January. I'm about to put the link in chat. And if you have any questions during tonight's presentation, please add them to the chat. We'll talk about all questions at the end. With that, I'll turn it back over to Cynthia, and I'll be in chat if you have any questions or comments.
Okay, I'm going to take the screen and define the screen here. All right, so I'm just going to give a brief intro to our speaker, Garry Hayes, Professor Garry Hayes, who's a geology professor at Modesto Junior College. Are those cockatoos, Garry? I meant to ask you. Garry. Mike, can you figure out why I'm not hearing from him?
Well, he's not muted. Garry, are you hearing us?
I'm sorry. I'm having a moment here on my own connection. Okay, did I just get introduced?
All right. Okay, you're good now, right?
Okay, you can hear me now. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Garry, I was asking if these are cockatoos.
I don't remember what they are. They were cockatoos of some sort down in a park in Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, they're cockatoos.
Yeah.
I love birds. Okay.
They
So,
were very...
Garry, huh?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Garry has taught geology at Modesto Junior College since 1988. He earned an MS in geology at the University of Nevada, Reno, and a BA in geology at Pomona College in Southern California. He has been an avid birder since 2014. I know many native plant people are also birders. So anyway, Garry, you want to just take the screen and start, please?
I'll be happy to. Okay, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, I'd like to start out by simply thanking you for inviting me to speak. I very much... Oh. So I very much enjoy having a chance to talk about this subject because our valley, the Great Valley of California, we call it the Great Valley. Other people call it the Central Valley, but it's a really special place. But frankly, we don't get much respect. And all it takes is to look at postcards that you can find when you travel through the state anywhere. And I actually managed to find one that mentioned something about Visalia and Fresno and Stockton and so on. But most of the time, you get something like this one in the bottom. And then there's just that yellow area kind of in there that it gets ignored by everybody when we're surrounded by so many other things that kind of capture attention, you know, Yosemite and San Francisco and San Diego and so on. You know, California is an incredible place. And it's like the Central Valley is that little stepchild that never quite gets the recognition that so many other places do. And yet, you know, my first response to that is to anyone that ever denigrates our valley is, you like eating, don't you? And because, you know, for various reasons, especially the geology, we're one of the richest agricultural regions on the planet. And we are producing food far outside our actual area of the country. Like you can see the numbers there. You know, most of the time, I don't want to just read this to you, but But it is true that a very large amount of food gets grown here. But of course, that means that the land has been co-opted from what it once was. And that's a lot of what I wanted to talk about today. Because 95% of the valley no longer is what it once was. And understanding what that valley once was gives us I know, as far as I'm concerned, a path forward to rebuilding some of that ecosystem that once existed. And of course, the native plants is a huge part of that. The native population of the birds and the other animals is an important part. And there are still just some incredible places in our valley that just leave me stunned when I see them. It was mentioned that I sort of recently took up birding, and I lived here for 30 years before I realized that one of the world's greatest accumulations of migratory birds was just 8 miles away from the Vintage Fair Mall. And so it's been a life journey for me to learn more and more about our valley as well. But as a geologist, I come at things from a somewhat different direction. I mean, there's the way that things are now, and there's a recognition of a history, a human history that goes back, a written history that goes back a mere 200 to 300 years or so. But the valley has a very rich history that is far, far older. And the way I often put it with my students is, ask what's the cliche about beauty? And they eventually get to that point about beauty being only skin deep. And we have a rather plain looking valley, and you can look at it as a place that is just kind of a dusty farmland that can look kind of ugly in many respects, and yet just beneath the surface there's great beauty. It's kind of a weird way to put it, and yet it's so very true. And so it's our job as people involved in the environmental community, involved in the teaching community, to try to bring back an idea of what our valley was like and what it could be. I had to work hard to get a picture that showed me something of what our valley would have looked like before all of the farmlands came in. And this was about the best place I ever found, looking down on the ranch lands, on the prairie lands that lie east of where I live here. I love that part of our valley, and I go up there often just to have a look and to see get at least a sense of what it once was like. So when we dig beneath that surface, looking for that beauty, of course, in the case of geologists, that means digging holes for garbage. A big part of the story I'm going to be telling about tonight was the result of the county of Madera County building a garbage dump, or no, excuse me, a toxic waste management facility. And I mean, they had to put the garbage somewhere, so they decided to dig a hole. And you can see that they got fairly far down. And at some point, they started finding bones. And this developed over time into an agreement between the paleontologist at Fresno State, the college in Fresno, the university in Fresno, to dig up whatever bones they could before they started dumping the garbage there. And so that's kind of where our story is going to begin. But kind of before that, I have to do the geology thing, because we do live in one of the strangest places. I live. I know that not all of you are from the Great Valley, but it is one of the biggest weirdnesses of the entire American West. And it is basically, why in the world is it so flat? It's weird. I mean, this is if geology was a hurricane or a tornado, you have all of this chaos. We are surrounded by mountains. We are surrounded by volcanoes, huge fault lines. I mean, most of you have heard of the San Andreas Fault, but there are literally hundreds of faults running through California, and many dozens of them are dangerous from a seismic point of view. You can even pick some of them out when you look at the mountains. You can see the linearity up here, this part of the San Andreas system coming down through here, and other faults that run through the north, San Andreas coming down south. And you can see that many of the mountain ranges are outlined by fault lines. So we're a geological hurricane surrounded by these vast mountain ranges, and yet here's this valley floor that's absolutely flat. It's flatter than just about any other place in the country, even compared to a place like Florida. It's weird. And so that's one of the things that makes it interesting, but it's also, for understanding the past, it's gold, because this is the one place in California that isn't eroding away. This is collecting sediment, and it's been collecting sediment for a very long time. And so I wanted to start out by doing some heavy duty geology. So I hope you'll bear with me. We only have to learn 4 things here, and I hope that you'll find them actually interesting, even if this is a kind of a dry looking diagram. But if we were to cut the state in half and look at it from the side and look at our Great Valley, you would see this is actually to scale, this outline. So you have the Sierra Nevada off to the east of us. We have the Coast Ranges here that by scale don't rise all that high, but there's these various elements that kind of tell the story of California for the last 150 million years. So here's the parts. These are the ones you have to memorize. There will be a quiz. I am a professor after all. We have the Great Valley Group, and this is the collection of sediments that lie under our feet if you are ever in the Central Valley. It's deep. Well, I've got a separate slide to talk about it, but we have the Great Valley Group. We have a weird thing, a very weird word called the Coast Range ophiolite, and the native plant people will be very interested in that ophiolite because there's a lot of interest in serpentine. This is where a lot of it's coming from. There is the Sierra Nevada, another weird word, batholith, which literally means deep rock. And the batholith is the granite, its essence, and other rocks that make up the Sierra Nevada. And then there is the Franciscan complex. And this is another weird one. So they're all very, very different from each other. It would be hard to mistake, the Great Valley and the Sierra Nevada and the Coast Ranges and the various kinds of rocks of the Coast Ranges, and yet they're all related to a single geologic process. All of them, you can see all of the elements in this picture: the Franciscan complex, the Coast Range ophiolite, the Great Valley Group, or the Great Valley sequence, and the Sierra Nevada. And they're all united by this very strange thing that has happened, a subduction zone. And what happens at a subduction zone is that the oceanic crust and the underlying mantle are being crunched and swept under the North American continent. Every year, this area in the pinkish red color there, that area is being forced underneath the edge of the continent at a rate of about 4 or 5 or 6 inches a year. We feel that happening because every so often, at least where this subduction exists, it actually doesn't exist here anymore, but it is not far from us. It's in Northern California, and it continues again down in Mexico. But that 6 inches doesn't happen smoothly. The rocks are held in place by friction, and each year more and more stress builds up, and each year it's 6 more inches and 6 more inches, and when about 10 or 15 or 20 feet of stress has built up, it suddenly gets released at once. And if anyone in California knows, that means earthquakes. And so this is a very dynamic process. So the ocean crust is diving underneath the North American continent, and in the process, things happen. Number one, all of the mud, or most of the mud on the ocean floor, gets scraped off. And that's what develops into what we've called the Franciscan complex. In between, what we call actually an accretionary wedge, and in between that accretionary wedge, sometimes that even shows up as islands offshore of an active subduction zone. But in between, there's a relatively quiet ocean setting, a shallow sea. And it's that shallow sea that collects sediments, and that's what became the Great Valley eventually. But over here, this oceanic crust, the deeper it goes, the hotter it gets. And eventually, at a depth of maybe 80 miles, the rock partially melts and forms magma. And that magma will make its way to the surface, either as volcanoes or as vast bodies of molten rock that cool slowly over a long period of time. So there's a whole lot of stuff all at once there. But it does lead to, I always talk about the stuff forgetting that it's on the very next slide. So there's the business about the earthquakes and the sinking of the rock. So if we want to understand the past, we kind of have to look in other parts of the world. And the Sierra Nevada once was a chain of volcanoes that we call a magmatic arc. And we have those all over the world today where subduction zones are still active. The Cascades province up north of us with the Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens and so on. Down in Central America and South America, the belt of the Andes and the volcanoes that are found there. So our part of Central California looked like that 140 million years ago. There were volcanoes erupting. But of course, those volcanoes, if we go back to this picture for a second, those volcanoes are fed by these vast bodies of magma deep underground. And those magma, not all of that magma makes it to the surface. And so it cools very, very slowly deep underground, 4 or 5 miles down. And it cools to form granite. It's a rock that has I still remember what I thought of rocks when I was up at Yosemite. I remember them just being gray. But if you take a close look at a piece of granite, you'll find that it's actually made up of crystals. It's fascinating. Black crystals, light colored crystals, glassy crystals, all held together in a solid rock. And so when you are in a place like Yosemite, I just can't get over how cool this is to me. That walking around in Yosemite, you are walking underneath a volcano or a series of volcanoes that were once 4 or 5 miles overhead. In other words, when you are seeing Yosemite, you're not just seeing a mountain that lifted up and is being actively eroded. Everything in Yosemite Valley used to have another 4 miles of rock on top of it. And on top of that ground, there were volcanoes. So that's the first element of this subduction zone, the fact that it leads to the melting of the rock. And that is an explanation for understanding how the Sierra Nevada formed. That area in a subduction zone where material gets scraped off is absolute chaos as far as the rocks are concerned. You can see in this picture on the left how twisted these rocks have become, having been caught in that subduction zone. This is a very, very geologically violent place. And if you've ever wondered, I mean, if this sets you to wondering what these, a place, where could you go to see things like this? We have in our own area, we have a delightful place that I know is well known to the native plant folks here, Del Puerto Canyon. And up that canyon, up about 15 miles, you go through these rocks that have been just terribly altered by being messed up in this subduction zone. So that's the accretionary wedge. Remember, there's a quiz at the end. So we have a magmatic arc and an accretionary wedge. Then, and another place, a very spectacular place to see some of these rocks that formed in this subduction zone is to go out to Big Sur, or especially the Marin Headlands and the coastline north of San Francisco. And you can see that same kind of deformation, the twisting of the rocks. And not only that, you get to see some of the ocean crust. There's some unusual rocks around Nicasio, for instance, that are called pillow basalts. These are volcanic rocks that form the ocean crust. Then, of a special interest, the Great Valley, which is really our focus tonight, it sits on something. It was once a shallow sea, and the sediments that filled that basin were sitting on something. They were sitting on oceanic crust. Now, all across the world, the most common rock on the planet is a rock called basalt. It's a black volcanic rock, and it makes up the bottom of all of the world's oceans. The oceans are covered by mud, but the mud is only a few hundred feet thick or a few thousand feet thick. But inevitably, underneath all of that is basalt volcanic rock, a very dark volcanic rock. Well, the subduction zone took some of that rock and pushed it up onto land and forced it upwards so that it started to undergo erosion. And again, in Del Puerto Canyon, we can see a cross section of this oceanic crust. It's literally like taking, well, I mean, what was it? The Core, the stupid movie a couple of years ago, quite a few years ago now, where they tunneled into the earth trying to find their way to the core to save humanity and all that kind of thing. But you can do the equivalent by simply driving up Del Puerto Canyon, because you will go through several thousands of feet of oceanic sediment, and then you break out into this very weird looking rock that is the ocean crust. And not only do you get to drive through the oceanic crust, you can continue right down into the Earth's mantle, the layer that underlies our crust. The crust all over the world is 15 to 50 miles thick. And underneath it is the mantle, which runs for half the distance to the core of our planet. Well, that mantle has been brought to the surface in places like Del Puerto Canyon and all across California, as it turns out. Because of the so many faults that we have, the deformation has literally ripped the portals of hell from underneath our feet and brought it to the surface and exposed it to erosion. So an ophiolite, that weird word, is a kind of a description of oceanic crust. It's actually a suite of rocks, several different kinds of rocks, mostly volcanic at the surface and some coarser grained stuff at depth. But underneath all of that is mantle. And it's made up of basically one kind of mineral called olivine. And usually I have to get used to, in a class, I'm always asking them, okay, what color do you think olivine is going to be? Well, it's green. And when it undergoes metamorphism, it becomes a mineral called serpentine. And to a native plant lover, serpentine is a special category of rocks. And it's especially important in California because something like 3/4 of our counties in California have outcrops of serpentine. But again, if you're in the local area, there's two incredible places to see it. And the first is, again, Del Puerto Canyon. Up in the upper part of Del Puerto Canyon, beyond the motorcycle park, all of the rocks turn red. It's literally called the Red Mountain Mining District because there are strange minerals that come from the Earth's mantle. And there's a lot of iron in this mineral olivine, and that iron will oxidize to form the red rocks, although the original rock is actually green. So this serpentine has a lot of poisons in it, a lot of toxins that most plants can't tolerate. And as a result, most of the normal plants that you would expect to find in this environment can't grow there. You notice there's no grass on that slope. The grasses can't compete in this kind of an environment. There are a series of unique plants that have adapted to serpentine soils. They are either serpentine tolerant or they actually require it, but almost no other plants can grow there. So you don't find the grasslands, you don't find the oak woodlands, you find a whole lot of the gray pines and other kinds of species that are tolerant of serpentine soils. So many, if not most, of the endemic species of California come from these serpentine soils. And once again, up in Del Puerto Canyon, great place to see that. The other place, by the way, and one of my favorites in springtime, again, for the wildflowers, is the Red Hills on the other side in the Sierra foothills up around Don Pedro Reservoir. Used to be a dumping ground, and they recognized that there were a lot of interesting plants growing there. It's been turned into a conservation area, an area, let me see, what do they call it? An area of critical environmental concern by the Bureau of Land Management. And it is now being managed to help support and preserve those plants that exist there. And also one of California's endemic fish. Of all the places, a dry, almost desert-like area has a unique species of fish that exist in just a couple of creeks in this Red Hills area, the Red Hills roach. So that brings us, though, to our most important element of our local geology, and that's our Great Valley. For 140 million years, it's been collecting sediments from the erosion of the ancestral Sierra Nevada for the most part. And it has accumulated many, many thousands of feet thick. If you are in the Modesto area, you have about 8,000 feet of sediment. And I don't know if any of you were kids who tried to dig a hole to China when you were a kid. I don't know how far you got. I got about 4 feet myself before Mom made me fill it back up, the rose garden and all. But 8,000 feet to find anything besides dirt or sediment under our feet around Modesto. But man, if you're around Patterson or Tracy or Bakersfield, the sediments reach a depth of miles, 25,000 feet around Patterson. And there are places around Bakersfield where the the sediments are as much as 50,000 feet thick, almost 2 Mount Everests, going down into the layers of the earth. So the thing about that is that sediments is the one place where we find evidence of once living things, where we find fossils. And so the Great Valley Group is the name we give to the series of sediments that host the fossils of the animals that I want to talk about. Now, normally, you can't see most of those rocks because they are covered by the very recent river sediments that fill our valley and the soils that have developed on top of those sediments. So normally we don't really see stuff like that. But occasionally, like when we're digging a garbage dump or when you are clearing land for some kind of a development, they will uncover some bones of creatures that were living here in the not too distant past. But to see the stuff that's deeper, I mean, on the one hand, you could try to dig a hole 5 miles deep, which has been done, but it's a really poor way of finding the larger animals that might have lived there. I mean, it's actually an entire thing with the oil business to dig holes and look for the microfossils. But I admit it, I don't get so much interested in the small algae and bacteria and so on that lived in these seas. I'm kind of interested in the larger things that were around. So we've been kind of blessed by the geology, because if you look at the eastern edge of the Coast Ranges, there's a kind of linearity of the sediments that are here. These are the sediments of the Great Valley, but they've been twisted upwards, so that, you know, this is the vicinity of Tracy right here. I think that might even be the Tracy part of the California Water Project, the intake for the California Water Project. But the rocks have been folded up and eroded so that by driving or walking into the mountains this way, you are actually going through layer after layer after layer of sediments that were once the bottom of the Great Valley. And the deeper you go, the farther in you go, the older the rocks become. So that's what we're about to do here, is to take a journey into the earth to see what used to live here. So if you wonder what California once looked like, I don't want to go through this so fast that you don't quite see it, but you can see the outline in gray of the present day boundaries of California right about there. And you can see that for much of its history, California was an ocean. 140 million years ago, basically this is 130 million, but this is what California would have looked like as the Great Valley was beginning to take shape. And it just has been simply collecting sediments ever since. So we're going to start digging down. And this is kind of a really odd picture. I borrowed it because I haven't got many pictures of people doing fossil excavations here in the central in the coast ranges, but I don't know why that guy's leaning over that way. It might be the angle of the picture, or it might be a fisheye lens, but I was looking at that tonight and I have no understanding of that part, but I do have an understanding of what's going on right here. They've discovered a rather large specimen. I don't know what they were after in this particular case. I suspect it was one of the large sea monsters from the age of the dinosaurs, so that would explain why they have such a large chunk of rock here. What they will usually do is outline where they think all of the bone is, and then they will cut around it and then cover the whole thing in burlap bags and plaster, and then they will take it to a lab, and then they will do the careful job of uncovering the fossil in labs. So that's the hard work right there. You can define hard work any way you want. I like this part because this is that discovery. This is Indiana Jones stuff. Taking it back to the lab, you're going to be very meticulous, the kind of thing I never had patience for. But it is, I have to say, one of the most incredible experiences you will ever have to uncover a fossil, and to just realize that you're holding the remains of something that was living long before humans were ever around. And so on an almost daily basis, that's what's happening at that waste disposal site down in Madera, the Fairmead Waste Disposal. If you want to have an idea of the kinds of things they found, they have put together a marvelous museum called the Fossil Discovery Center at mile 21.5 near Fairmead and Madera. And if you're ever traveling down the road down there, it's a great place to stop. It's a modest museum, a couple of rooms, but of special interest to native plant folks. They have actually put together a Pleistocene arboretum as part of their exhibits. They've got native plants that we know were present during the ice ages, on the Central Valley floor, and they've got a pond out there that recreates part of that ancient environment. So this is what it looks like down in the dump before they start piling the dirt. They have found somewhere on the order of 30,000 bones representing many, many dozens of species: mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and plants. And on their displays, they have some of the creatures that they've discovered. And so if we were to go back within the last million years, this would be the time of the ice ages up in the mountains. There were never any glaciers in our valley, but there were larger rivers that flowed down into the valley. The valley was a wetter place at the time. It was a rich prairie environment or oak woodlands. And on those prairies, there were all manner of grazing animals and some surprises. You can see the camel at the top there. I've got that list: camels and horses, antelope, bison, and the antelope and bison you can maybe understand because we have bison all across the American West at one time. They were here in the Central Valley, as were antelope. But the camels and horses, what have we ever learned about horses? I'm pretty sure that in school you were told that horses came to the American West as a result of the Spaniards, and some of the horses later escaped to become the wild horses that we see today. And camels just aren't part of the story of the American West. So here's the weirdest thing of all: horses evolved in North America, as did camels. And in the past, there have been many, many dozens of species of horses. There's only the 3 species of horses left today, the zebras, equus, and donkeys. And yet there have been dozens and dozens of species throughout time over the last 40, 45 million years. And at various times, connections were made along Beringia, along Alaska, the Alaska-Russia frontier. There were connections, land connections made there. And so horses and camels moved on into Asia and then into Europe and Africa. But they evolved here. This is their ancestral home. And so that's part of the story. There's also the elephants. And elephants, there have been many, many species of elephants in the past as well, such as the mammoths. There were also the giant ground sloths and also unique wolves. And of course, the very famous saber-toothed cats. Part of your quiz tonight is to remember California's state fossil, and that is the saber-toothed cat. And then there is the largest predator that ever lived on land since the time of T-Rex was the short-faced bear. And that's what you have down in the corner here. These things were quite larger than polar bears and grizzlies by twice the size. These things stood 12 feet tall at one point, or the largest of them. So we've got a whole incredible menagerie of animals that lived here as recently as 12,000 years ago. So here we have the short-faced bear. If I stand 6 feet tall, and if I was standing next to this bear, number one, I wouldn't be standing next to it, I would be running away, but my head would be about to here. I mean, at the shoulder, this guy was 6 or 7 feet tall. Kind of an insulting name for such a monster, but they lived right here in the Great Valley, and their bones are just a short distance beneath the surface. If you were ever digging that hole to China when you were a kid, maybe you were looking for dinosaurs. Well, you wouldn't have found any, but you did have a chance of finding some of these creatures because their bones have been scraped up at depths of just a few feet. I have a piece of a tusk from a Columbian mammoth that was found at one of the gravel quarries up on the Tuolumne River, upstream of Tuolumne, of Waterford in Modesto. So we've got these gigantic bears. Dire wolves are a good 50% larger than the wolves that we have today. They are actually a different lineage than actual wolves. They're very closely related, and they obviously look very similar, but they are actually of a somewhat different lineage. The camels, very speculative about the hump. We don't know if they actually had humps or not, but there have been dozens of species of camels that have been discovered through the years across North America, and they lived here in the valley. In fact, the horses and camels are the single most common fossils found at the Fairmead facility. Another spot, by the way, that a rich fossil discovery was made was at UC Merced at the freeway entrance, the freeway off-ramp. They were digging up earth to make the overpass, and they discovered a suite of fossils there that were very similar to what they found at Fairmead. The elephants, fascinating. You all know Manny from Ice Age. He was a woolly mammoth, but we actually had a Columbian mammoth that lived here and all over the American West. They were larger than the woolly mammoths. Some of these guys stood upwards of 13 feet or 14 feet at the shoulder, and they survived. Again, most of these animals went extinct around 11 or 12,000 years ago. Although I've been doing a little more work, well, not work, I'm just reading about mammoths. And it turns out there were still mammoths in the world while they were building the pyramids. They were stuck on an isolated island north of on northern Russia, Wrangel Island, but they survived to within just 4,000 years ago. There were probably no more than 300 of them living on the island, all by themselves, the last of their species, for something like 6,000 years after they were isolated. The giant ground sloth, well, you all know what a sloth looks like, I imagine. They hang around and in the rainforest down in Brazil and so on. But the giant ground sloth was like 8 feet, 9 feet long. It was huge, and it had massive claws that could have been defensive. You look at their claws and it looks like something from a dinosaur, but they might have also just used them for digging. So, and the horses, and basically a diorama. These are all paintings that were commissioned for the Fossil Discovery Center when they opened up. So this was the Great Valley. Not that long ago, there were people that saw these animals 13,000 years ago, and in fact, it is not known why they all, it's the megafauna that went extinct. It was the very larger animals that went extinct 12,000 years ago, and why is very much open for discussion. There's a hypothesis that it was overhunting by the newly arrived humans. There's also the idea that the ice age was ending and that climate change altered their environment so much that they were not able to survive. And there's also one that's actually gaining some prominence, the idea that they were actually the extinction event was confined mostly to North America. And there is some possible evidence of an asteroid strike, not one that hit, not one that formed a crater, but one that penetrated so much of the atmosphere and then blew up with the power of many, many, many hydrogen bombs, and would have caused widespread change of the climate and just straightforward destruction. There is scattered evidence that something like that happened. And so there are those three different hypotheses that may have all been interconnected too. I mean, it's not just one that could explain all of this. So these are just the last. We've only penetrated the first 50 feet of 25,000 feet of sediments. So I hope that you're ready to stay up late tonight. Okay, maybe not. But the deeper we go, if we get to rocks that are around 5 to 7 million years ago, we find the ancestors to the horses that came later. We find the ancestors to the elephants. There were many, many different kinds of elephants that have lived in the world, as well as mastodons are also elephants. And we had tortoises here that were the size of Galapagos tortoises. And my favorite, you saw the picture earlier, there's something a little weird about that salmon that you see there. It's literally a saber-toothed salmon. It had some huge pegs. It's not sure we'd call them fangs or what have you, but they were big. These salmon grew to a length of around 9 feet that we've been able to find. And they were found in the sediments of our valley. I know that Turlock Lake, the area around Turlock Lake, is one of the places where they found them. I'm really especially proud of this one because you notice that that's written by Buer. That drawing is by Buer. He was one of my students at MJC, and he's gone on to become a paleontologist, and he's done some research into these salmon. A little deeper, 20 million years ago, that's when there's been a big change, because from this point on, California was a seaway. It was a shallow sea. And you can imagine that there were all kinds of fossils that we would expect to find in the ocean, the clams and the shells, the different kinds of fish. And we also find an amazing collection of mammals that lived in the seas. There's the dolphins and the whales, there's the seals, but there were also manatees that lived here. They were much more widespread many years ago. But one of the weirdest things about our valley is that there was a circumstance down near Bakersfield It gives you a hint. It's called Shark Tooth Hill. And in that place, a great many animals died. That's where a lot of these fossils have been found that I've just described. But the most famous aspect of it is the shark teeth. And we don't find skeletons of sharks because they don't have bony skeletons. Their skeletons are made of cartilage, so it's rarely preserved. But their teeth we find. And you can see that some of those teeth have been huge. Some of them are very small. We take our students looking for these once a year on our way to Death Valley, and we find teeth, shark teeth sometimes that are a mere quarter of an inch. But other times we find shark teeth that are nearly a foot long. They belonged to the largest predator that ever lived in the seas, as far as I know. Possibly 60 feet long. It's basically a direct ancestor to the great white sharks. And I guess 10 years ago, not many people had heard of these, but then Shark Week came along, and then a couple of movies, The Meg, and things like that. So now a lot of people have heard of this Carcharchodon megalodon. Their fossils have been found in the sediments of our Great Valley. And they are big. This is if you grew up watching Jaws, this is the largest size of the great white shark that we've ever found. This is the size of these megalodons. They were massive. They could swallow cars, basically. And now we go deeper. And when we get to the 65 million year mark, remember, our valley is 140 million years old, the sediments of our valley. We're into the age of the dinosaurs. And so the question here is, could this have been a scene in a place like the ancestral Sierra Nevada, the ancient Sierra Nevada that included those volcanoes? And the fact is, yeah, probably. The only problem is that the Sierra Nevada has been a mountain range off and on for 150 million years, which means it's been eroding. It's not the kind of place where fossils can be preserved because it's constantly disappearing. But we get lucky sometimes. And so if we take a look here, this is what North America looked like, the western part of North America during this age of the dinosaurs, right near the end. And weirdly enough, not only was there the Pacific Ocean out here, there was also an inland sea that crossed the entire Great Plains, all the way from Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico. There was a seaway. And so all of the famous dinosaurs that you've ever heard of, the T-Rexes and the long necks, I call them the brontosaurs, and actually they brought that name back, but the apatosaurs, the triceratops, they didn't all live at once. They did not live at the same time, but the triceratops and the T-Rexes did live at pretty much the same time, right towards the end, as well as the maiasaurs and the other duck-billed dinosaurs. Well, you can see on a map like this that the best place for them to live would have been on these river floodplains that flowed towards this inland sea. So when you hear about the most famous of North American dinosaurs, they lived in this river floodplain environment over in Montana and Utah and Arizona and New Mexico, and to an extent in Colorado. That's where you find the dinosaurs. But they had to have been living on this West Coast as well. And in a few lucky circumstances, they were found because rivers would flood. They would overwhelm some of these animals and drown them, and then they would carry their carcass out to sea. And then the carcass would sink and become incorporated into the muds on the floor of the ocean. And therefore, the rocks of the Great Valley have given us a few tantalizing remains. And one of the things that I have to just take special pride in, just because I live in Stanislaus County, is that the first remains identified as a dinosaur were found by a kid from Gustine, Al Benison. He was a 16-year-old. He liked to take his bike up into Del Prado Canyon. And when he was 16, that was like 1936, 1937, something like that, he found bones belonging to a dinosaur. And it was the first dinosaur ever discovered and identified. And this dinosaur was a Saurolophus, one of the duck-billed dinosaurs, probably about, they were big. They were 25, 30 feet long. They weighed several tons. And they have since found a fair number of others, half a dozen or more, that the oh boy, I didn't even put the name, but we actually have a official state dinosaur that is based on this creature. They have not precisely identified this first one found by Al Benison, but they have found others that they have made into our state dinosaur. But that's not the best part of the story. In this environment of a shallow sea, we had the normal fish and sharks and things like that, but we also had reptiles that had adapted to living in marine conditions. Excuse me. And so there were these plesiosaurs, for instance, that unfortunately would be recognizable to you as the Loch Ness Monster. They lived here in the Central Valley. And my colleague at Stanislaus State the paleontologist Julie Sankey has dug up some of these fossils. There's a fully complete skeleton down in the Museum of Natural History in Los Angeles. But these guys were about 30 feet long, mostly neck, as you can see. They may have lived a bit like tortoises, or sea turtles, in the sense that they may have crawled out onto land in order to lay their eggs, but they lived pretty exclusively in the oceans. And then there's a kind of a surprise. I would put this picture up, and you would never think of this as a reptile. It looks an awful lot like a dolphin, if nothing else. And it actually lived precisely like a dolphin. And yet it was a reptile. And it was evolved from a land lizard type reptile. It still has the 4 legs. And it's not apparent from the picture here, but inside those fins, it's nothing like a fish. It actually has all of the knuckles and fingers that are kind of fused into a single fin on either side, but there's 4 of them. There are 4 legs on this creature with all of the knuckles and so on. These ichthyosaurs were as diverse as the dolphins and whales are today. We found a couple of dozen species. They range from 4 feet to 70 feet, as you can see there. The biggest ones had eyes the size of a dinner plate. But probably the best story of all, nobody had ever heard of these until Jurassic Park got into the mix here. But in our own local area, one of the first fossil reptiles ever found was not a dinosaur. It was a sea-going creature called a mosasaur. And these mosasaurs have been found all over the world. They were many different species, and they had some pretty menacing teeth, like you can see there. These were apex predators in the age of the dinosaur seas. They ate sharks. And that same kid, the same kid who found the first dinosaur in California, a year later, when he was 17, found an entirely new species of mosasaur in the California coast ranges in the Great Valley sediments. It's maybe not too much of a surprise to learn that Al Benison actually grew up to become a rather notable paleontologist. I got the opportunity to meet him back in the 1990s. He showed me where he found that dinosaur up in Del Puerto Canyon. It was a real privilege to meet him.
Garry, this is Cynthia. I just want to remind you that if possible, if you could end by 8:15 so that we'll have 15 minutes of question Q&A.
That's no problem. I'm literally about 3 slides from the end. So
thank you.
no problem. So that's the skull that Al Benison discovered. It's the most complete skull ever found in California. The mosasaur, the one he found, you can see, was about 20 feet long. There was another species found. They argue now about whether they are the same species, but up to 35 feet. And they were some fierce predators. They were actually basically relatives of Komodo dragons. So if you can imagine a Komodo dragon, the biggest ones today are like 9 feet long. If you can imagine one 35 feet long with its limbs modified into fins, there you can see it right there. You can see these guys had basically fingers and claws that made up their skeleton. These were land animals that adopted and evolved into a life in the sea. And so, like I said, they finally got famous when Jurassic World came out. They had a rather exaggerated version of a mosasaur, but they, at least anatomically, they got it pretty good. It was, you can't see it here, but it actually has a second row of teeth inside the roof of its jaw. You know, if you got caught by one of these, you weren't going anywhere. But you can see how they sort of resemble a Komodo dragon in this drawing here. So boring, you know, some people think where we live is boring, but when you look beneath the surface a little bit, not at all. And I have to say, you know, this is a picture from the current day from one of our wildlife refuges. It's still a fascinating place. I mean, it's fun to look at what happened in the past, but we still have an intact ecosystem in our valley today that we are trying to promote and rebuild, both plant-wise and animal-wise, in the wildlife refuges that we have up and down the valley. And one of the great joys that I've had in the last 5 and 6 years, as I've really gotten into birding, is to realize that we have intact parts of the Central Valley ecosystem, and they are fascinating. If you've never had the chance to explore the Merced Wildlife Refuge, the San Luis, the San Joaquin, or any of the others that are, they're strung all up and down the valley. So they may not add up to what we had in the past, but they are a piece of the past, and they are preserving our valley for all of these species into the future. It's a marvelous place that we live. And like I said, we deserve a lot more respect than we actually get. And so thank you. I want to thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any kind of questions that you have.
Cool. And I want to make sure everybody knows the chat is still open. So we're still accepting questions, of course. But frankly, we have a lot of material in the chat already for discussion, which is actually, you know, pretty good. Sometimes we still have really good talks, and yet we don't have a lot of people asking questions. So this one really has a lot of people's imaginations running wild. I think the first comment was somebody asked, is this the same environment as Red Hills? And I think at the time you literally mentioned Red Hills like right after you talked about Red Hills right away. So I think they got the answer to their question. Robin asked, can we get info after the meeting about the museum in Madera? And she also said right away, I think this might be the Fossil Center in Madera, and she posted a link.
Discovery Center?
Yeah.
That's the one, yes.
That's the one, okay. And then she also posted the book State of Change has paintings that recreate some of the past fauna. She posted another link, actually posted a couple times. Then Cynthia said, oh, wait, did he just say camels and horses, etc., originated in the Central Valley? And
in North America, I would say.
Yeah, Marilyn Gary said they originated in North America, not specifically in the Central Valley. And then Jennifer asked, Gary, if you won a funded dig and the chance to excavate at the La Brea tar pits or up in the famous deposits in Montana and the Dakotas, which location would you choose and why?
Actually, that's a question. What did I choose? Um, that's a great question. I don't actually want to work in the La Brea tar pits for the very sole reason that Mike Rowe would have had a field day with that. It's a dirty job. That tar is awful, awful stuff. Um, but I got a great opportunity when I was just kind of beginning my career in the late 1990s, about the time Jurassic Park came out. Um, oh my gosh, my mind just went blank. But the consultant for the dinosaurs came to visit Modesto, and we took him out for beer and pizza. And he invited us to come up to Montana, since you brought it up. And so I and 15 of my students got to spend the better part of 2 weeks excavating dinosaur bone, or searching, I should say searching for dinosaur bone. We were looking for velociraptors, not the one. Velociraptors were from Mongolia, but we had an American raptor called a Deinonychus, which was larger than the actual velociraptors. And we went to the original discovery site, and we spent 2 weeks digging, looking for more evidence. We found a few pieces of them, but what turned out to be special about that whole affair, 2 of my students stumbled on a fossil skeleton of a creature that had only been found once before. It was called a Zephyrosaurus. And they ended up excavating it, and found, I think, probably 30 or 40% of a skeleton, only the second one ever found. And so that was one of the great adventures in my life, being involved with that.
I see Jennifer popped her video. Did you have a follow-up question, Jennifer? No. Okay. And then let's see. Tracy said, is there also evidence of a mass extinction event? So you talked about a mass extinction event, and you talked basically about the different theories. And I guess the question is, what is the evidence that suggests that kind of stuff happened?
First of all, I guess the timing is the coincidence between the end of the last ice age 13,000 years ago and this extinction event about 12,000 or 11,000 years ago. I could get into all kinds of trouble by talking about when humans arrived in North America with every anthropologist that ever was. But the oldest confirmed human remains come from about 13,000 years ago. So there's this idea that we came in and we had the tools to go hunting them. But what I've been reading of late, it was in the news literally in this last month, that there are several sites around North America that they found these little spherules, little round on microscopic bits of glass and bits of, I guess, meteoritic dust that suggest that there was an event that caused what's called the Younger Dryas. It was a sudden cold spell that lasted a few hundred years, and it coincides with the extinction of many of the animals. And so the thinking is that this disturbance of this asteroid impacting and exploding may have caused a sudden change in the climate, and so there's some evidence. It's certainly not confirmed in any way. So
okay, Cynthia has a couple of questions. She first asked about the state dinosaur. Marilyn actually posted a bunch of information about it, so basically that answer, I think, is probably taken care of because Marilyn gave quite a bit of information.
The Augustinophilus morrisoni or something like that.
That's right, yeah, and she gave some specific details. And then Cynthia asked, what was the valley like right before people arrived? Did it completely flood every year or things like that?
The valley changed with the climate. The ice ages were a really unstable time. We had 5 major ice ages that we know of that all happened in the last 2 million years. So at times the valley was warmer than it is today during the interglacials, and other times it was much cooler and more moderate. During the ice ages, there was a vast amount of runoff. And so most of our rivers would have flowed on average maybe 5 times the size of what they are today. And so the whole regime of the valley would have been changing with those climatic changes. But overall, from what I understand, most of the time the valley itself would have been dry enough to be pretty much a prairie for most of the last 2 million years or so.
There's an awful lot of, interesting praises and thank yous and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Robin commented, I love going to see the sand-tailed cranes and other migratory birds in the winter in the Central Valley. Rhonda asked, are the fossils that were found in Stanislaus County able to be viewed at Madeira's museum?
I believe that most of the fossils that have been found in our valley are in the collections at UC Berkeley. Most of them. I know that the dinosaur is there and the mosasaur is there. I'm not sure. I know that there are plesiosaurs. Well, like I said, at least one of the plesiosaurs is on display down. They found it near Fresno, but it's on display at the LA Museum of Natural History. There has been talk of developing some kind of a museum with the stuff that was found at the Merced overpass, but actually make it part of the rest area there. But I've not heard of any developments along those lines.
Margaret asks, when did the Great Valley emerge from the shallow sea, and what was the sea brackish? And was the sea brackish?
In this area, I believe I understand it was about 4 million years ago. I think it kind of progressed from the north to the south. The north end became land sooner than the south end. Oh boy, I'm gonna get this backwards somehow, but I believe that the seas persisted longer down towards Bakersfield. I saw Jeff Tolhurst on the list up there. He might be able to provide a better answer than I could, but in the local area, I believe it was around 4 million years ago that the seas were mostly disappearing. And this was actually related to the extension and development of the San Andreas Fault.
Rhonda asks, are there any excavations going on in our area currently?
None that I know of, other than the Fairmead site.
I'm trying to understand this. Tracy said that related to Gary's statement on possible asteroid. And thank you for added info. So I'm not sure she got her answer or not.
Okay.
And then Arlene said, if a small asteroid killed off the North American megafauna, wouldn't it have killed off all the recently arrived humans as well?
Good question. I don't know that we have enough data to say one way or the other. Humans are pretty adaptable to changing conditions that sometimes the plants and animals can't adapt as quickly as humans can. So that's my impression. I as a professor, I've learned to talk rather than to look confused and quiet. But I don't have a great answer to that question, no.
Janet asks, how could humans have survived that asteroid event?
Yeah, well, that would be my response, is that they're very adaptable. That when conditions change, not all of us may survive it, but some of us do.
Mary asks, you said the Sierra Nevada are the result of volcanoes. I always heard they were formed from glaciers. What's the answer?
You are correct, but it's the difference of the timing. The rocks exist because of volcanic activity, but the part of the Sierra that we see was eroded and exposed the rocks, and glaciation had a lot to do with that. Rivers did most of the work, but glaciers shaped the valleys like Yosemite and Hetch Hetchy and others. But they shaped the mountains. But the rocks that make up the mountains came from that very different process deep inside the earth.
Jennifer asks, can you see the former height of the inland sea in the erosion lines on the hills as you drive 108 by Knight's Ferry, or is someone pulling my leg?
You can. It's not so much like bathtub rings, but there is a rock layer up there called the Ione Formation. that is made up of sandstones from the shoreline that existed 50 million years ago. So if you had been in the Sierra, so when you're driving up through Knights Ferry, the Ione Formation is one of the layers that's found there. And then right on top of it is of Valley Springs Formation and Merton Formation. Those are all the things that you see in the vicinity of Knights Ferry. But that Ione Formation was a beach that was right along the edge of that ocean. And there were rivers coming across what is today the Sierra Nevada. They came all the way from central Nevada, possibly as far away as Idaho, gigantic rivers flowing into this sea. And because of the fossils in the Ione Formation, we know that it was a jungle. It was a tropical jungle, not anything like what we would see today.
A saber-toothed salmon. What do we know about the saber-toothed salmon? I mean, what does a salmon need with a saber tooth? And
they've argued about that because they're not sure exactly even how they were placed. They could have been something that they used in breeding battles, or they could have used them maybe to hold, they think that it's possible that the pegs or the teeth were off to the side, and that maybe they used it as a stabilizing when they were in the rivers trying to build the nests and so on. So I'm not entirely sure. I can say that if you look up Julia Sankey, she published a short booklet about the fossil salmon and the other stuff. So I'm afraid I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know the publisher, but there is a short book by Sankey regarding the salmon and the other animals in the Central Valley region.
Diana asks, will the proposed Del Puerto Canyon Dam inundate the part where the dinosaur bones were found?
It won't cover the spot itself. There would be a shoreline. Boy, that dam is such a bad idea for so many reasons. Not to get necessarily political, but it's going to do a lot more damage than what it's economically, it's just not worth it. But yeah, there will be water 200 or 300 feet deep adjacent to where they found that. And the thing that concerns me the most is, Sankey is spelled right. I see that John Harris,
right?
Sankey. But the dinosaur site is actually a huge landslide, and I'm actually worried about them putting water inundating a landslide that's stable in a dry condition and then just soaking the thing. So I mean, there's a whole lot of things, but it won't actually cover that site, but it certainly will cover rocks that could potentially have fossils in them.
Right. Jennifer points out, when you think about the salmon, the saber-toothed salmon, that of the narwhal is you can look at that as possibly an example of dentition, I guess, in that. So the short-faced bear and all these large animals, I'm still trying to figure out why all these things were a problem for the big animals and not so much for the small ones.
Part of the argument that I've heard about that is similar to why certain animals survived the big extinction that took out the dinosaurs. And that is, the smaller animals often hibernate, or they are living in burrows beneath the surface, so that if there's some kind of a horrific disruption to the environment, they could just go into hibernation and wait it out, in a sense. Is one reason, one description that I've heard. If it was a human thing, well, they were, even today we go after the big ones. Although, if you're trying to survive, I can't see going after a large mammoth when it's a lot easier to go after something that's smaller. So I'm not, that's why the human one doesn't work for me necessarily. But yeah.
I watched a video of a grizzly bear chasing after, I don't think it was a moose. I think it was like an elk or something like that. And that grizzly bear was moving fast. And it's just scary to think of these megafauna around, because they, if I thought grizzlies were scary, You know,
Yeah.
so the Fairmead facility, if you kept going down, because ultimately you guys are going to go down a certain distance and then stop, right?
Right. Right.
But if you kept going down, wouldn't you find even more and more stuff?
You would hope so. Fossils are so frustrating sometimes because, it's like I've just described the valley as this huge collecting basin, but you also had to have some reason that animals died in one particular place. And so you will find bones concentrated in some places, and then you can go digging for a long time and never find them in other places. So it's not just a matter of digging a hole deep enough. It has to have an environment that they would be preserved in. So I think at the Fairmead site, they think that it was a very muddy lake shore where a lot of animals might have gotten stuck in mud. And of course, the La Brea tar pits, which literally translates to the tar pits. But that was a case of animals getting stuck also in the tar. So it isn't just a simple matter of just digging a hole anywhere. You have to get lucky and find a spot that actually did collect carcasses in some way. If you map.
That was literally going to be my next question. What was it about the Fairmead that actually caused things to act kind of like the tar pits?
Yeah, it could be
And
that.
then
It could also, just a point to make, on the inside of a river meander, the river slows down and dumps sediment. And so that's oftentimes the kind of place you find a carcass as well.
I know
Mike,
Cynthia. Yeah, Cynthia has something
yeah,
she wants to
I
ask
want
in
to jump
person.
in because we only have a few minutes. And I still have this kind of the same question, which is, we know that like when the rivers get really full here, they like they overflow and things like that. And my question is, before people came and kind of modified everything, did they just naturally overflow every year, creating a big swamp? Swamp's the wrong word, but you know what I mean? And
yeah, actually, well, that's happened in historic time. I mean, we had that Lake Tulare that developed just
right.
a year ago, and in 1861, we had a flood that produced a lake that ran all the way, I believe, from Red Bluff down to Stockton, that was 20 miles wide and, like, what is that, 200 miles long? It took them months. They had to move the state capital from Sacramento to San Francisco while they waited for the lake to drain. And that's historic time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But even before that, was this just the way that it was? Is the whole valley would flood and
Yes, I mean, yeah, everything that we see happen today has happened in the past. And I do know that there was one really unique event where about 600,000 or so years ago, the river flowing out to sea from our valley was not at Sacramento. It was not the Sacramento Delta. It was elsewhere. And somehow that got blocked. And so for several thousand years, several tens of thousands of years, the entire valley was a permanent freshwater lake that left a clay layer that is still causing us problems today because of the way that it interacts with groundwater. So
wow.
very strange.
Thank you.
So the obviously you look at the ocean's got curves and
Hey, Mike.
yeah.
So we're at 8:30, so we have to stop. So I'm going to turn off the recording. But those of you that want to stay can stay, and I think Gary said he would stay longer. So if you want to keep chatting, and if you want to actually talk, just raise your hand, and we'll give you the ability to talk. All right. So thank you very much, Professor Gary. This is fantastically interesting. And thank you very much to everyone that attended.